On bottom of page Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph 91a. We're holding the bottom 4 lines from the bottom, the part that says Amar Amalei Antoninos the Rebbe. Antoninos said to Rebbe. So this is hold on a second to make sure I got the right place here. Okay, so it says like this. Antoninos said to Rebbe. Antoninos again is according to Rabbi Stainzalts, he was the emperor of Rome. We're not sure exactly who he was. Rabbi Stainzalts, and I think you should have that Ariel in your edition. He says Marcus Aurelius, in his opinion. But either way, he was a contemporary of Rebbe. He lived about 200 years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So he says, Amalei Antoninos le Rebbe, Guf u'neshama yecholim lifter as min hadin. He says, in theory, when it comes to the Day of Judgment, the body and the soul have a way of avoiding judgment. It means they could excuse it. Hold on, I just let people know that we're starting here. So he says, why? So he said that this body and the soul could say to get themselves, they could avoid judgment. Guf oimer, the body could say, neshama chatas. It's the soul that's sinning. What's the proof? Because he gives a proof. The proof is Hebrews, or on the bottom page 91. 91a should be the last page. So we're talking about the conversation that Antoninos, the Roman emperor, had with Rebbe, the author of the Mishnah. So he says that when it comes the Day of Judgment, the body and the soul could each one get out of being judged. Why? Because the body is going to come separately to God and say, the neshama that you gave me is chatas. So the body says that the soul sinned. What's the proof? Because as soon as the soul leaves me, I'm not able to do anything. I'm like a stone. So as a proof from here, we see clearly that it's the soul that gives life and does things. Because as soon as the soul leaves me, I'm not functioning. And then the soul on its part can say separately from to God, Gufchat, the body sinned. Why? Because the day that I left the soul, I left the body, is harini peireches ba'aver ketzipor. I fly like a bird, meaning I'm not grounded in any space. So the whole reason why I'm in a certain space doing certain things is only because I am in a body. So it's the body that's to blame. So I think there's some of the Farshim and some of the commentaries say that when he says Hareini Peireches Ba'aver Kitzipor, so seemingly that I'm flying in the air, like I fly in the wind, so to say, like a bird, which means to say I'm not in a body. That's really only talking about. He says that's the neshama of the chaytim, those who sin, that they have no menucha, they have no calmness, so they feel like they're flying. They're just like a bird. But the souls of the righteous actually have menucha in heaven, and this is the Marsha says this. They have menucha, they have calmness, they have a tranquility in the Garden of Eden in heaven. So the idea that the soul feels like a bird that's flying, that's not necessarily a positive thing, because in a righteous soul, they move in a conscious, organized fashion to the next world. And it says, and so he asked another question: why doesn't the soul bring a proof from before it's alive, right? The soul is also alive before it goes into the body. Hey, Judith, on page 91a. So why doesn't the question that another commentary asks is, why doesn't the soul say that before I was born, before I came into the body, I was fine, I didn't do anything wrong? So he says that's not a proof. Why? Because sometimes there's a reincarnation, a Gilgul. So we did sin before in our previous existence. So he wants to talk about the soul doesn't want to talk about the previous life because in the previous life it did sin, so then kind of wouldn't do itself any favors by talking about that. So instead, the soul talks about after the life, hey Shruki, on page 91a, that the soul talks about the afterlife, that it's like a tzipur paracha. So the question Antoninos asks, to catch everyone up, the question Antoninos, the Roman emperor, asks to Rebbe is that the body and the soul could get out of judgment by each one claiming separately that it's not us that did the sin. The body says, look, as soon as the soul leaves my body, I'm not functioning. So anything that is being done by the soul, because my body exists after I die, even if it decomposes eventually, but it doesn't, so it's a proof that it's the soul that's sinning. And the soul says, look, as soon as I leave the body, I'm like a bird that's flying. The Mashar says, again, it's not a positive thing necessarily, but it's still not sinning. So each one can get out of judgment. This is a very famous Gemara. So what does Rebbe say? So Rebbe says, I'll give you an example. The Melech Basar B'Dam. Let's say there's a king, flesh and blood. Shahayla Pardis Naya, who had a beautiful orchard. Bahaya B'chayres, we're turning the page to 91b. Bahayu B'chayres Nais, and he had beautiful first fruit. B'chayres is like the firstborn, the first fruit. Just a little side note that this week is Parshas Kisavai, and the first law that we learn about is the laws of Bikurim, is the first fruit. So just the connection between our Parsha and the idea of the first fruit. I don't know why Rebbe has to give the example of first fruit in the example. Everything that, people, someone like Rebbe and Antoninos was obviously on a high level of scholarly talent. There's no way that Rebbe was talking down to Antoninos. So they were very clever between each other. So why does this example have to be with first fruit? It could have been, and if anyone has any commentary on the side that they see, let me know. Ariel, if you have something from Rabbi Stainzalts, why is it mentioned specifically first fruit? But he says, for instance, a king has an orchard with first fruit. So he places two types of guards to guard his orchard, but each one has a quality, and the other one, each one has also a problem, is lacking something. For instance, one is limb, can't walk, and like Rashi says, it's not just a chigar is not just the person who's limping, but literally has no ability of his legs or her legs, and the other one is blind. So one is there in a physical form, that he's there and he could walk, or she could walk, she could move around, but he's blind, he can't see anything. The other one is there, could see what's happening, but has no feet. So Amalei Chigar L'Suma, so the Chigar sees, but can't walk. So the Chigar is the lame person, says to the blind person, Becharis Nois Anira, I see beautiful first fruit in this orchard. Bepardes, Ba'avar Kiveni, come ride on top of me, because, let me ride on top of you, because I can't walk. So hold me on your shoulders, and I'll be your eyes. I'll bring you and I'll guide you where to go until we could eat it. So Rachav Chigar Gabi Suma. So the lame person, guard, rides on top of the shoulders of the blind person. Veheviam, and he guides, or she guides them to the orchard, and eats the first fruit. Again, I'm not sure why it has to be first fruit. It's not just because first fruit are more interesting. Obviously, there's a more hidden idea there, I would think. So they eat from the first fruit. So they do a combined effort. Each one uses what they have. The blind person has his feet, and the lame person has his eyes. So the king comes back up to over the orchard. Where are my beautiful first fruit? So Amrlai Chigar, so the lame person says, hey Aaron, the lame person says, we're on top of page 91b. So the lame person says, Klum yesh li reglaim lahalich ben, you're judging me? Why are you looking at me? Do I look like I could move? I'm not mobile. How would I be able to eat the first fruit? Amrlai Suma, and the blind person says, Klum yesh li anaim, do I have eyes? How would I know to find the first fruit? Maybe that's why it's first fruit, because if it wasn't the first fruit, then the blind person could just move around and pick any fruit and that he ate from. But here, that he took a specific fruit, he would have needed eyes for that. So he says, "Amalei suma klum yesh li einayim." Do I have eyes, lirois, to see what to pick? Ma'asa. So what did the king do? The king is no fool. Is he realized exactly what these guys did. So he judged them as they did their crime. Is hirkiv chikar agabisuma. He put again the lame person on top of the blind person, and he judged them as a single person. Means each one claimed independently that they couldn't be possibly responsible. Look at me, I'm lame. Look at me, I'm blind. The soul, like that's the question Antoninos said. The body says, I don't function without the soul. And the soul says, when I'm not in the body, I'm flying like a bird. I'm not doing this kind of stuff. So why are you judging me? So what does Hashem do? Similar to this king, he says, Av Kadosh Baruch Hu mevi neshama. He takes the soul, v'zorka beguf, and he puts it together with the body. V'dana isam ke'achad, and he judges them as a single entity, body and soul. It sounds nice, but also we have to know the technicalities of it. Of how does this happen? Some commentaries say this is talking about the day of judgment when there's the resurrection of the dead, which is the conversation we're having, where there's the physical body and soul. Seemingly, right? Everyone, when we talk about the judgment after a person passes away, the body remains in the ground and the soul goes up to heaven. But here it says that God takes the body and puts it together with the soul. So the technicality of it is, some people say we're talking about the great day of judgment, not the judgment after a person specifically passes away and goes to the next stage of Garden of Eden or hell. So here it says, and he judges them as a single team. As it says, he quotes a verse to give backing to that idea. He says, like it says, Yikra Shemayim mi'al. He calls up to heaven, which is referring to the soul, and to the earth to judge together. Is Yikra Shemayim mi'al, to call up to the heaven? That's the neshama. That's the body. So he judges the soul and the body together. He quotes over here Sefer Abris. In the commentaries I have, he quotes the Sefer Abris. It seems to me the Sefer Abris is Pinchas of Haaretz, which was a chassid, but I'm assuming that's he. And he says like this, that he's not talking. Interesting. He gives an interesting point. If this is the Pinchas of Haaretz that I'm thinking of, which was a Chassidish Rebbe and also a Rav, that he says that it's not talking about the body actually. That we know that there's different components to the soul. There's the more ruchnis, even the soul itself, we know has 5 Chamish has 5 names, there's 5 levels of the soul. So he says there's a part of the soul which is the physical part of the soul, like the body part of the soul, that has bodily reactions to things. So then when a person has a physical reaction, when you're hungry, when you have other things that you're so to say your body's reacting to. So just like in the question of Antoninos, the body says, I have no feeling. I don't do anything. I'm just lying there. The soul comes in me. So is there a part of the soul that has the kind of physical needs and wants of life? So the Sefer Bris says yes, that there's a part of the soul that's very, very, very close to a physical being, and that's the part of the soul that God combines with its higher, more spiritual side of the soul and puts them together. And he says in the Sefer Bris, it says. He calls it shikoyach gufay umugushemes b'miktzas. It's a little bit of a physical part of the soul. Sheish la'adam ha'Yisraeli nefesh tachtoina v'nefesh al-yoina. He said it could be in Tanya we're talking about the nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul, but here he calls it the nefesh tachtona, the nefesh al-yona, the higher or the lower soul. And he says, "V'im nigzer al nefesh al-yona b'chatoiseh oinshin v'yisrum malbish moiseh b'tech nefesh al-tachtona hamugushemes nefesh b'nefesh." And he says, "Va'ayoda targish etzar mamish." This is the point. The point is that seemingly, where's the physical pain in the soul? The pain that you get through the day of judgment is only the body feels the pain. So he says, no, the part of the soul that's very physical, the Sefer Bris says, also has the feelings of pain, of physical pain, and Yisurim, that the punishments that the angels give it. So he's saying it's not talking about the resurrection dead, it's talking about after you live in this world, but there's a part of the soul that actually feels the physical pain. There's something about that he says that the soul actually feels. There's a part of the soul that feels even what's happening to the body after it passes away. Okay, so that answers that question. So Antoninos asked, how do we judge the body and soul together? That each one could claim separately that they weren't the one to blame. So just like the person with the orchard, God recombines the energy either in the resurrection of the dead or the different component parts of the levels of the soul that have different levels of feelings and consciousness, and puts them together and judges them as a single entity. Okay. Now Antoninos asks another question. Antonino, by the way, there's, according to some opinions, Antoninos eventually, there's many conversations Antoninos has with Rebbe. And one of the questions he asked if he's going to have a portion in the world to come himself. He wants to know if he's going to have a portion in the world to come. And Rebbe tells him he is going to have. Some people say that Rebbe even converted Antoninos to Judaism, which wasn't such a crazy concept back in Roman days. A lot of Romans were converting to Judaism before Christianity. I just want to bring the quote to Rashi. When talking about Antoninos, it says, Shnei goyim bevitnech, when Rivka goes to see, when Rivka, the Chumash tells us, when Rivka, our mother Rivka, is pregnant with, she thinks as a single confused child who wants to go to shul and wants to go to church at the same time, right? So he wants to go to the house of idol worship. She's very concerned. So she doesn't go to her husband. She goes to Shem, her grandfather. And when she goes to Shem, she says, my son is confused. This is inside, something's happening. So it says that Vayomer Hashem La, God says to her, meaning through Shem, Shnei goyim bevitnech, you have two nations in you. Who are the two nations? The two children, the twins. Yaakov represents the Jewish people, and Esav, which represents the Edom, Rome, modern day Western civilization. So Rashi says, when he says Shnei Goyim, it says Goyim Chsiv. It means to say two nations two types of people. Who are this? Antoninos for Rebbe. That when Rivka was feeling a confusion in her body from her pregnancy, Shem already then told her that there's two great people that are going to come from you. And who are the two great people? Rebbe, who represents the people, Rebbe, who authored the Mishnah, who represents from the Jewish side, from Yaakov's side, and who is the person from the Roman side, from Esav, is Antoninos. So he was obviously a person that Rivka already had, so to say, there's prophecy about him already thousands of years before he was born. All right, so he continues. Antoninos, Omar Antoninos le Rebbe. Antoninos says to Rebbe like this. Again, these are questions that they're not someone who reads the Talmud today would say that these were two people that were, with zero education and having conversations like, kids have conversations. What are those little lights in the heaven called stars? So, and we're talking about highly educated people, both of them. So obviously their questions had more depth than what the surface shows. So Antoninos le Rebbe. Antoninos asked Rebbe like this. It says also, it's another thing, I forget where it says it. I think it says that Rebbe's father was obviously Rabban Gamliel of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel of after the son of Rabban Gamliel. So he was the grandson of Rabban Gamliel of Yavna, Rebbe. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, that in his times, when Rebbe was born, there was a decree about Jewish people having circumcision, I think, or general Jewish birth. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Antoninos' father, or their mothers, had a close relationship because, again, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the house of the Nasi. That was a respected office. Even the Romans respected that office. And the Romans, so she had with the aristocrats of Rome. And it says that they switched babies. The mother of, because it was a bris, he gave a circumcision. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel gave his son Rebbe to the Roman aristocrat, and the Roman woman gave her son Antoninos to Rebbe's mother, and Rebbe's mother nursed Antoninos, and because she nursed him from a holy righteous woman, it says he had a pull towards Yiddishkeit, to Judaism and Jewish thought. So Antoninos says to Rebbe, why does the sun rise in the east, and it sets in the west? Okay, so we're obviously looking at it because of the cycle of the sun, but he doesn't. Most of the Farshim say that what his question was scientifically. I don't know how it would work. Maybe Shuki or one of the other guys could give insight. Rashi says that what his question was is to saivev eskola olam, that every day the sun should circle the world, to go back to east. Vitishka, and there it should set. The Vitishka, the hava hachile hava minalach neimashe kes bizach denoiga olam kachu mimakim sheitz sham nichnas. Because if just the question was just why doesn't it go the other side, that we could ask the question. The point of the question was why doesn't it leave the same way it comes in? A normal person, Rashi says, is you exit the same door you enter. So if the sun enters our life, so to say, rises in the east, it should also set in the east, even though if it circles, then it gets dark by going to the other side of the world. But the commentaries say that Antoninos wasn't concerned with science. Antonino says, don't confuse me with the science. God is the creator. I want to know why God created science, that's the way it has to be. Why couldn't he create it in such a way that the sun itself sets in the same way it comes up? It goes up in the east and comes back in the east. Or Rashi says it circles the world. But whatever it is that it shouldn't have. He was more concerned with the style, not the science of it. The style is a person exits the same way it enters, so too the sun should exit the same way it enters into the world. So in the he says to him,
Rabbi, sorry to interrupt, but just to add a little bit of cultural context around that period of time, most of the civilizations that lived around Israel, the sun had some sort of godly role. It was an entity, right? And so for them, the idea that it's a thing is that it's just like a person. It walks in and it walks out. Like there's a difference between that and in this time period, at least, like in Israel, it seems more like the Israelites have this belief in like it being like a heavenly body and not an entity of itself. Like it was part of the heavens, not the thing that created heaven. For instance, the word shamash in Old Assyrian, like by the times of Ashurbanipal, which is not too far away from this period in time, like the entire city was named after the sun Shamash. And so like the idea was that it was the god that was protecting the city. And so if it came in one direction, it should come in, it should do like a full circle around for protective purposes and then exit the way it came and then do the same thing every single night. And it was an argument about whether or not whether it sets in the west, so to speak, but like why doesn't it ever set anywhere else? Like there's a pattern where it always goes, and why doesn't it deviate from that pattern? And that's what the argument kind of is over here, when you add in that context a little bit.
It could be. I mean, I do believe that Antoninos did not worship idols. He did believe in a single God. But it seems from the Mefarshim, similar to what you're saying, is that at the end of the day, even the Rambam writes that the Shemesh has tremendous das and understanding, and also why did Hashem make it that way? But we're going to see in a second the answer. So Rabbi says, he says first he asks, so if it would rise in the east and rise in the west and set in the west, you'd ask me the same question, and set in the east, you'd ask me the same question. No, so I meant the same thing. Why does it set in the west? Why doesn't it set in the east? Okay, it should go back, like Rashi says, in the same entrance that it came in, like we were saying. So he says like this. So Rebbe answers him, okay, if that's your question, and that's the case, is to show respect to his master, I mean to his creator. That to say properly goodbye to his master, it goes to it sets in the west. And like Rashi says, like Kedei litin shalom l'koinei, like Kadosh Baruch Hu, to God. Shashchina b'mayrev, the God is in the west. And once it comes to the west, the reason it's setting in the west is a way of bowing. It's a famous idea. That's what we learn. One of the ideas that when it talks about his bonus, contemplation by God, is to analyze that. When we analyze it as the sun is constantly bowing towards God, it's going towards the west, because Shechina is b'mayr of God is in the west. I was actually just learning the Rambam Yomi. The Rambam talks about in the laws of Yom Kippur that one of the reasons why some of the sacrifices are done in the west is because Shechina b'mayr. That's the idea. The Shechina is in the west. So if the God is in the west, he's constantly acknowledging and bowing towards God. That's its nature. Its nature is to constantly acknowledge Hashem. So like Kadosh Baruch Hu, Shechina b'mayr, God's in the west. As it goes toward the west, it bows towards God. Shebara. And it goes in bowing like the sun setting towards God. So that's the answer initially Rebbe gives. I just want to say an interesting idea that I happened to look yesterday. I was learning yesterday a small piece of Imri Bina. It's a Chassidus from the Mittel Rebbe. He says that he goes and he analyzes the idea of space. Where's the starting point of space, right? We have east, west, and north and south. So he says that east-west is the orach. He asked the question, what comes first, length or width? Right? When you have, if space is being created, what comes first? Is it the length or the width? So the Mittler Rebbe says length comes first. And what's the beginning of length? Is east. We know that the east is the beginning, like the Jewish people were always starting in the east. Kedem is east. That's the front. Ma'ariv is back. So he says that first comes length, and length means godliness. The holiness starts in the east, and the length ends in the west. And once you have the length, then you expand the length right and left, which is the width, which is north and south. The question is, if east is the beginning of the length and the end of the length is west, so why would the Shekhinah, why would God be in the west? We would assume that the opposite. God should be in the east because the beginning point is God. And I think the idea is, he doesn't say that, but I think the idea is because that's the whole point. The whole point is, it's not about where God starts from, it's where God wants to be. And God wants to be the furthest away from the obvious place where God is. It means that's the whole point of creation, to take a place that's distant from God and bring godliness there. So you want to know where God really is where he wants to be. And that's why the Karbanos are done in the west. That's why it says Shechinah b'mayrav, Shechinah is in the west. I don't know if that's the pshat, but that's just my idea. Okay, so he says, so Antoninos doesn't accept that answer. It says that the cosmos are constantly bound towards God. So again, Shuki, when you're talking about their belief in then, I think he wasn't subscribing to the science. He didn't want to be limited to the science and say because the sun has to circle the world, so it's obviously going to have to rise at some point. That if the world is round, it rises at some point and sets at another point. He says, but let it just drop, let it go halfway. And if it's bound to God, it should be like a person's bound to a king. You see a king and you drop. You don't walk all the way to the throne, right? So he's saying, let it go. Go halfway. Right? The sun should come up to 12 o'clock to the midday, the hot sun. And should set immediately from there. So Rebbe answered, no, that wouldn't work, because most people function on the sun. Meaning to say is, most people, when they look outside and say, oh, it's day, so they organize their day according to that. There's two people that would not benefit from the sun, even though what you're asking is a good question. He's saying, in theory, you're right. The sun should bow halfway, should bow when it's at its highest point. At that point, when the sun is the strongest, is when the sun should really bow to God and should, so to say, leave the room. But it would be a bad effect on workers who wouldn't understand when, what their time frame is. A worker has to work throughout the day, and there's sun, and so the worker knows that, okay, if the sun is in the middle of the sky, she has another few hours to work, and to organize their work schedule. And if all of a sudden the sun just disappears, all of a sudden it's going to throw them off. And the other one is the people walking, people on the road. People who are on the road also need to know when how much hours of light they have. It seems from Antoninos' question, because if his question would be actualized, meaning to say that they're just suddenly set, so after a while, workers would get on board and understand that the sun is suddenly setting, and the people on the road would get on board knowing that the sun being halfway in the sun is not, the sun being in the sky is not an indication of what's going to be. But it seems like that it would just be spontaneous, constantly spontaneous, and therefore it would never be with a schedule. Like a person who's running on emotion. So as soon as the son feels this overwhelming love for Hashem, again, the Rambam writes that the as much as das as we think we have, this is in the first 4 prakim of Rambam. The Rambam writes that the sons are much smarter than any of us. So it's not like it wasn't. We look at it today, that how did people worship the sun? The sun has people once upon a time had much more knowledge than we do in creation, and they understood how much knowledge the sun has. But nevertheless, it's just a shamish. It's just a servant of God. It's not its own entity. So therefore, Rashi says. Therefore, he answered him that it wouldn't be good. I'm going to read the Rashi. He says, let it just drop halfway in middle. Why does it even set at all towards west? Tavi ad emtsai, let it go halfway. Ad shel rikia, v'tishka l'sham, and it should set there. It should bow from halfway. Klape Ma'ariv towards Ma'ariv, but it shouldn't have to go all the way towards the west. Shekach derech bnei adam. That's the way people are by a king. You don't go up to the king and bow. You bow from a distance. It could be what Antoninos was saying is he wasn't arguing with the amount of light days. I think what he was saying is like this: we all know, right? There's every day has a few more minutes or less minutes of light than the day before, right? In the winter we have much less light, and in the summer we have much more light. So no one's arguing that there's the days are not exact. But a regular person who's not using a clock and doesn't have an app to tell them when sunset is just constantly looking at the sky to see when is the sun setting, where's the sun heading. As it's going more west, you have less time left as the time is going. It seems like the Antoninos was thinking that the sun should go up and just stay there for the amount of hours it needs to be light. Let's say 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, 8 hours a day, and then suddenly drop. So the suddenness is what's the problem, because then the workers don't see it moving slowly, and they have to try to keep a calculation that yesterday it set at this time, and tomorrow it's going to set a little later. So he's not arguing the fact that the sun should remain light, that the area should be lit as long as a regular day, but it shouldn't move that far. It should just stop in the middle, wait, and then just bow like a person would bow from a distance to a king. I think that would be the idea. So he says, so he answered Mishum Poilim for the workers. Why? The ilu kachaya machshich pitom. If it would just suddenly get dark, is shikshachama be'emsa rikiya, while the sun is just in the middle and wouldn't be setting, is me'ira b'yoisa, and it's shining very light, and everyone thinks it's it's middle of the afternoon. Then everyone thinks there's still more time in the day. And the people who are working or until it gets dark, and they're not organizing the time properly. With those who are traveling in the light time, right? Not supposed to travel at night. They wouldn't be able to see the movement of the sun to recognize how much time they have until it gets dark. The Vakshtem by Selina said they should start looking for a place to sleep. The therefore, even though you're right, it should set suddenly, but Hashem made it for such a way so the people that need to use the sun as an indication of how much time they have left, so therefore it slowly sets into the west. It gets weaker. The color iron gets a little darker. People know that it's getting dark, and therefore they have to organize and get ready to move on into the evening. Okay. Antoninos asked another question to Rebbe. Antoninos asked a question to Rebbe. When does the person get the soul? The godly soul. When does a person get a soul? A person is created by the mother and father, right? And so when is life of the soul, the person become its own entity, not just being something that's growing in the mother's womb. So when is the soul put into man? So our Rebbe answered Mishas Pikida. Seemingly, we'll see what second Pikida means, but seemingly the Pikida means from the time of when the child was initially, when the mother first was able to start the pregnancy, is when the soul comes into this little being. Mishas Pikida, Mishas Yitzira, when the body is totally formed, and when the pregnancy starts. So he says Mishas Yitzira. So Rebbe says when the body starts to be formed in the mother's stomach. He says, so Antoninos disagrees with Rebbe. Again, Rashi, it says Pekida is something else. We'll see in a second. But Pekida is, so he says, is it possible that a piece of meat should be 3 days without salt, without something a preservative? So if you're saying that we're talking about Yitzira could be 40 days later, right? When's the person? So if you're talking about from the beginning of the pregnancy, you're talking about it's a lifeless piece of meat. It's there's no preservative. It can't be 3 days without melach, and it's not going to start to spoil, to rot. So therefore, so Antoninos disagrees with Rebbe, and he says Mishas Pekida. Therefore, we must say from the time when there's the pregnancy start is when the soul comes into the child. And so Rebbe agrees with Antoninos, and he says, Amar Rebbe says, Davar zel lamad Antoninos. Antoninos taught me something. And we'll see he taught him a few things. He taught me this, and he's right. In Mikra Messiah, and there's a verse that says, Shenemra, it says, Upkutcha Shamra Ruchi. From when you're poiked, from when the pregnancy starts, is when Shamra Ruchi is when I hold my soul, my ruach. So therefore, we see clearly that it happens from the Pekida, not from the Yitzira. Rashi says, what is Yitzira and Pekida? So here's an interesting thing. Rashi says, Yitzira is Shenikram Kulei B'Basa V'Gidin Vatzamas, when the body is already formed with flesh and bones and skin, so the baby's already starting to take form in the, I'm not sure at what point in the pregnancy that is, but obviously more further on in the pregnancy, or Pekida. What's Pekida? So Rashi says like this, not the time of the beginning of the pregnancy, but we know that there's a famous medrash that says that before every seed becomes a child, the angel takes the seed and walks over and flies over to God and says, ask God, as poikid asks, what's going to be with this person? Who's this person going to be? Is a good person going to be rich, poor, smart, not so smart, other things? The famous Gemara that says everything it asks besides Yir Shemaim, right? Yir Shemaim, God-fearing, is not going to be addressed. God says that's up to the person. If the person wants to be God-fearing, it doesn't depend how smart you are, and doesn't depend how rich you are. But if that person is going to be rich or poor, or smart or not so smart, or other things, other talents, what job is it going to have? What department are we putting it in? Is the seed going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a Talmud Chacham, a moil, a shoichet? So he says that's the point of when the soul comes in. What's going to be with this seed? Like it says in the Gemara, Nida. And that's when God says this is what the person's going to be, a rich person, not so rich, or all the other things that this discusses in Nida, that's when the person gets the soul. So Rabbi says Yitzira, and here, so Antoninos doesn't agree with Rebbe. Why? He says, Antoninos, can a piece of flesh not have life, can't have a preservative? The soul is the preservative of the body, right? As soon as a soul leaves the body starts to deform. If you're waiting for the body to be formed in order for it to have until it gets its soul, why is this tipa not the seed not rotting? That it shouldn't rot in the stomach of the mother. And like it says, that once it spoils, we know that it can't create something. I just want to say something. This is the Gemara. This is not the Gemara. This is why the man and woman had to separate before Mount Torah 3 days, right? Moshe comes down from the mountain and says to the Jewish people that if you want God to speak to you, then you have to separate. They can't have marital relationships 3 days before the giving of the Torah. Why? Because for 3 days the seed is alive. After 3 days, the seed is considered a sricha, it's considered rotten, and it's not considered tamei anymore. A woman's only maflet zera only becomes impure up to 3 days. Okay, so here he says, Rashi says that the Antoninos taught Rebbe something. It's funny, Rashi, I don't even know what Rashi means. Rashi says, when he says Lamdoni Antoninos, he doesn't say, he says midvar of lamadati, from his words I learned, as opposed to what, I'm not sure. Okay. Now Antoninos asks a more complicated question to Rebbe, which is the famous, we know this is a famous question. When does a person start to fall under the influence of their evil inclination? Now, about the nefesh alikis, there's many different opinions, but the accepted opinion is that the nefesh alikis, the godly soul, really enters the person at the time of his bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. So when the person a woman becomes 12 and a boy becomes 13 is when we get our godly soul. That's most opinions. But the evil inclination is there right away. The question is when. So when does a person get the Yetzer Hara? Right? So when does Yetzer Hara start to rule by a person? Mishas Yitzira or Mishas Yitzia? So here he clearly says this actual soul itself, Antoninos says, is from the time of conception, from Pekida. Or when Rashi says when the angel takes the seed and brings it to God and asks what's the story of this person. It's not, today you have all this technology trying to change who we are, whether it is to become smarter or to live longer. The Gemara says it's all preconditioned. So Antoninos says when's the Yetzer Hara? When's a person get all those negative there's negative qualities that are part of who we are, that we struggle with our whole life? When's that into the person? It's funny, my grandmother, I want my mother's mother was she never a lot of times people look at children and say, wow, so every child's beautiful and every child is beautiful, and so later they get corrupt. My grandmother wasn't a believer of that. She says usually if you see someone who's rotten later in life, you could trace it back to their beginnings too. So here Antoninos says the same thing. When's the Yetzer Hara come? It's not going to show up at 20 years old. It shows up. How early does it show up? Does it show up at the moment of the body forming, or as soon as the body leaves the mother? But after that, there's no question already the Yetzer Hara is there. So so then Rabbi says again, the time when the body starts to form. He says that the child should be like an angry child trying to kick itself out of its mother's womb. Therefore, it doesn't have any kind of character. Basically, what Antoninos is saying is we can't assume that the child, the fetus, has a character. The Yetzer Hara is really the character of the person, right? So the person, they can't assume that the Yetzer Hara has, that the child, the infant has or the fetus has a character before it leaves its mother. Because if it started to have character of anger or what have you, issues, so it would behave that way in the mother's stomach. In the stomach, it has no character yet. So therefore, he says, it would push itself out. Therefore, we have to say that it gets its character when it leaves. Rabbi Antoninos. Rabbi agrees with Antoninos. Says, I learned this from Antoninos, who make Messiah, and there's a pasuk that tells us this, and this is what God tells Cain. Right. What does God tell Cain? The Pesachat Rovas, when by the Pesach, by the entry, when you enter the world, is when Chatas, when the Yetzer Hara, when the negativity is ready to jump on a person. There's commentaries you bring down that that we do learn that a person learns Torah in the stomach, and here it says like this. He brings the Mashal. The Mashal is a question back to Rivka, right? Again, Rivka is pregnant with 2 children. It says what makes her go to shame is because her children were fighting in the stomach. So if you're saying the character comes only Mishas Yitzia, what was happening with Esav and Yaakov? So Esav Medish, we know that Rivka said that when she went by a house of idol worship, Esav wanted to go out. So we see he already had a Yetzer Hara then. So the Ramat Shmuel answers that he says that it doesn't mean actually when the child leaves the mother. It means one from the last 3 months, from the 7th month when the child could live. So that last period of time already has character, and that's when Esav was acting up. And he says also, he brings down so why doesn't it try to get out right away? So it says because it's learning Torah with the angel. So what about Esav? So it says Esav was such a character that even though he had an angel in his stomach teaching him Torah, he still wasn't subscribing to that, and he was acting up. Okay, let's go a little further. Let's go one more case. Reish Lakish Rami. So it says this. Reish Lakish asked the question. The pasuk says it's the new Gemara, going back to the idea of when there's going to be the resurrection of the dead. There's a famous verse that says, "Ba Iver upisach." There's going to be an Iver. There's going to be blind, and there's going to be people that are lame, that are not going to be able to walk. They're going to be born together. And it says, another verse says that God is going to like a deer is going to fix the person that is lame and the person that can't talk. So we have one verse that says basically that the resurrection, it seems that the pasuk is indicating that when the resurrection of the dead is going to happen, they're going to be, the question is basically, how are people going to be resurrected? Are they going to come back if they have things that ailments that they have, or mumim, or things that are till today when a person has to identify a body, we identify a lot of times by scars or other things that you've went through. So how are we going to come up when the time of Mashiach comes, when the resurrection of the dead happens? Are we going to come up as perfect people, or with the things that we were buried with the shortcomings, the things that we were lacking? So he quotes the pasuk. One pasuk says, "Bam ivar pesach." There's going to be blind. There's going to be people that have their blemishes. That's how they're going to come up. And another verse indicates that they're going to come up healed. I'm going to translate the pasuk 100%. So it says, it's written like this, that it is written that I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the ends of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and the woman giving birth together. And it is written, means then that's one time that they're going to all come together, but it's going to be also those who have ailments or things that were wrong when they passed away. They're going to come back the same way. Then it says, then shall the lame man leap, so the lame person won't be lame anymore, and the deer as the deer, and the tongue of the mute sing. So the person who's mute will be able to sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out and streams in the desert. So everything's going to change when Mashiach comes. So one is, it seems like everything's going to be the way it was. And another verse says everything's going to change. So hakeitzat. So amdam v'mumon misrapim. They're going to stand up with their blemishes and get healed. The question is why? Why would God do that? Why would God say that they come up? So Rashi says, so I saw the commentary says, a beautiful idea, that, unfortunately, I'm not saying in a way of laughing, I'm saying, unfortunately, a lot of people who have unfortunately lost loved ones. Everyone eventually loses loved ones with his parents, but some people have lost loved ones too early, right? So too early, and if you have to unfortunately bury a child, God forbid, or someone young, and you always wonder how's you live, or if your parents die young, God forbid, right? So your mother, we have a friend who her mother died in her late 20s, and she's now close to 50. So she feels, she's 30 years older than her mother would be when she would come back to this world. So how's that going to work? Or for someone who loses a child, is the child going to be resurrected as the child was, a child, an infant, or a young age? So always people ask that question. But there's other things. There's people that have identity. There's certain things about them that was who they were. A person who couldn't walk, or a person was blind, or a person couldn't hear, or a person had other defects that weren't that was part of who they were when they were alive. So if everyone just came up healed and changed, so we wouldn't know who they were. We wouldn't. All of a sudden, you see someone that was blind that you knew you loved, or someone that couldn't walk, or someone who was missing an arm, and all of a sudden that person's perfect. So you wouldn't know who that person is. You wouldn't have you wouldn't feel like you have a relationship with them. So Hashem, as a kindness to everyone, is going to bring the people back as they were. And you see them, oh, that's my father, that's my son, that's my child, that's my friend, right? And you recognize them for the way they were, and then they get healed. So you see the healing. So it doesn't affect the relationship. That's something like it feels like it's kind of beyond you. That's, I see, one of the commentaries answer. Okay, guys, I'm going to finish over here. I just want to wish everyone a Yom Tov. If this time works for everyone, it works for me, and I know we have some people on the East Coast that it maybe works better for. I'm happy to continue this time. I see some people didn't make it to the class, but Shuki works for you?
Oh, this works great for me. Yeah, it's 8 o'clock, so this is 8:49 right now.
That's perfect. And I know
Perfect
Ari,
Much better for me as well.
I'm just going to say this. I didn't know you were starting early. Howard said, "Are you going to the class?" I said, "I didn't know it's now. Bye." And then I signed in.
I put it pretty clearly on the chat, but it said the new time. But now, looking for this class, we're going to try to start it at 7 Pacific and 10
But
Eastern.
the schmooze, I think maybe it's good. Right? I don't know.
So Judith's also better. All right, everyone.
But this time is good.